Hello, architects. This is Crissy from CS2, one of your Revenue Growth Architects hosts. Instead of our regular weekly podcast, right now we are sharing some past episodes of third-party podcasts that me, Charlie, Xander, or a combination of us have been guests on while we work on the future plans for the podcast. We hope you enjoy these interviews and maybe even find a new podcast to follow. Also, if you are looking for newer content from us, check out our YouTube channel at Revenue Growth Architects, or you can sign up for our newsletter on cs2marketing.com. Enjoy and look out for more from us soon.
Welcome to another episode of Collective Wisdom by Demand Collective. Today I'm joined by Crissy Saunders, CEO and co-founder of CS2 Marketing, a marketing ops agency that builds revenue growth architecture to power efficient and predictable revenue growth. Crissy also serves as an advisor to Sincari, Chili Piper, and also is co-founder and board member to Women in Revenue. Her extensive experience in demand gen and marketing operations is demonstrated through 14 years of successful marketing roles. Thanks for joining us, Crissy. How are you doing today?
Good. Yeah. It's sunny here in San Jose, so it's been a bit rainy and drab, but it's nice this morning. So I'm feeling good. Yeah, feeling healthy.
Nice.
That's all I can ask for in January.
Yeah. We just had the gnarliest storm down here in San Diego. Everything was flooded all over social media. The whole thing is just like rivers where streets used to be.
Wow. I feel like that's pretty uncommon for San Diego, right?
Yeah, we're normally like really nice year round. So whenever we get like something, it's like chaos, even a few sprinkles.
Yeah, I love San Diego. I've been there a few times in the past, and every time I'm like, I should live here. But
You should. So kind of digging into things a little bit, you began as a marketing coordinator at Adobe. You made the jump to marketing operations and marketing
yeah, and at the time it was Marketo, not Adobe yet. So very early on Marketo.
Oh, okay. So that's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about, marketing ops has changed significantly since then. That was 2010 when you joined, and I think marketing ops you took on in 2012. Like, how has the landscape changed? How has the role changed? And what was it like being in those early days of Marketo?
Yeah. Things have definitely changed and evolved. I think back then everything was quite new. Working at Marketo, I think that it was nice because we were in an environment where we were, it was a market automation, platform company. And so we were evangelizing why it was important to use marketing automation. And everything was pretty like rigorous and like nailed down, buttoned up at Marketo at that time, I feel like. Um, it was a very great place to start a career just because everyone was really like striving to do their best, like really top of their game. I've worked around a lot of great marketers like John Miller and Maria Pergolino. And they just, it was a great kind of incubator for people who were interested in marketing, but also just early on knew the importance of marketing operations. I mean, it was their target market. So it was great because you got the resources or people knew the importance of like what you were doing. I started there like kind of like you said as a general kind of marketer. At first it was like an internship for a few months and then I guess I did a good enough job and they're like, you can stay on full time. And
Yeah.
during that time, I was like really interested in Marketo and using it. And there wasn't a lot of like training or anything. Like I think now it's more common to kind of, find resources out there and things like that. But there wasn't at the time, especially in marketing ops too. It was like we were almost evangelizing like what marketing ops was as a role. There were some, people in IT that managed systems like that, like Eloqua. There were, like a marketing kind of coordinator or email. They kind of called them email marketers at the time because that's really what you use those platforms to do is really just sending email. There wasn't a lot more you could do with it until kind of like the Eloquas and Marketos came out. And then they were introducing things, like lead scoring and prioritization, lead capture for forms. And it was very inbound centric though. So I would say, and then it turned more outbound actually when you wanted to move up market and you go into enterprise. But it was the landscape for MarTech was quite small. You'd go to the way that people bought tech back then was you'd go to a trade show and you would have maybe like the 10 or, depending on Salesforce was huge. So that was where you saw maybe like, the hundreds of sponsors there and stuff like that, because there was just a lot of different companies targeting MarTech and sales tech. But when we look at MarTech specifically, it was pretty small, what you could do with it. And so Marketo was looked at as very advanced, which was cool to be kind of at the forefront of that. And I very much saw like an opportunity of like, oh, hey, if I get good at using Marketo at Marketo, like that's such a really good experience. So I kind of like use some of our university videos, like on the weekends, I would, lean into a few of my colleagues and kind of, be like, oh, can I build out lists for your programs? Can I start working on some of the programs? I also wrote a lot of content at the time, like we all wrote content. So some of the definitive guides, like we all contributed to, and I like that because I was an English minor in college and I can kind of flex some of my writing skills and stuff like that. But I just saw kind of an opportunity there, and I had some great mentors and a boss at the time. And yeah, so went just more into operations. So and because I was kind of unsure on what to do. I'm like, oh, I really like marketing, I like demand gen, but it looks like I'm kind of good at this like marketing ops thing. And so I kind of doubled down and went into that. But I think the pace of technology since then and what you like, how many tools there are and, data sources and things like that. I think the expectations have just like advanced. And what that means for marketing ops is just, and rev ops in general is like, there's these expectations that you can do it all. So why aren't you, where back then it was like, we need to do lead scoring and find data. Let's just go out and purchase some data on accounts who are using our competitors. Let's then see how we can apply that to them. Or, hey, we want to do direct mail. Okay, well, I'll figure out between this add-on and doing some of these things in Marketo with personal use URLs, and I'll just develop my own direct mail program. But it was expected that, things weren't so automated and advanced. And in some ways, a lot of that complexity of all the different platforms that you can use and what you can do has set expectations really high for what marketing ops can do. But we're still dealing with a lot of the same problems like bad data, band-aids, like tech debt, just I think because there's this pressure to advance everything. So I would say that that's a little bit of like how kind of I got started there, what it was like working there, and but also how things have changed. And I think we're going through another kind of evolution of MarTech too, which is the advancement of AI and like what does that mean for what marketers can do. But the problem, I think there's this false perception of like, oh, you can get advanced as like using artificial intelligence, but why are you still having like issues just trying to operationalize a funnel project? And they're not directly correlated. Like we still have the crux of everything, data and infrastructure and things like that, that isn't just going to be built with a robot or AI or anything.
Yeah. And so like, do you by chance, and I feel like marketing ops people have like always have like a favorite. Do you have a favorite, like a Marketo versus HubSpot versus Eloqua?
Definitely not Eloqua, but we've always been quite agnostic. At the beginning, it was Marketo just because of my my background with it
Me
and
too. I
having worked
started in
there.
Marketo.
Yeah, and like I think that everyone kind of is like, oh, you can do so much with it, and you really can. Um, I would say now between Marketo and HubSpot, I feel like they're both getting quite like on par with each other. Especially in the last year with HubSpot. We actually did a podcast about like HubSpot recently and how they've made some huge like massive changes that can make them, on par with Marketo or maybe even, more advanced. So yeah, I think I don't really have like a favorite, but I would say those are like the top two. And because I think that HubSpot is just because they're, their own company, they haven't been bought or anything like that. Like they will, continue to advance, and they've done a lot of the build versus buy type
Yeah.
expansion, and the rate of which they deliver like new features and things like that is like kind of incredible in my opinion. So we'll see, but they're on par kind of, I feel like, maybe to surpass Marketo. Marketo does, like, they'll try and get more advancements out, but it still feels like we're kind of like living in the past sometimes. But there's a lot of great enterprise level features that Marketo has too, around like programs and scaling those. And but yeah, we'll see how it goes. But both I don't have a favorite, both great. But some of the other players, like maybe less, we use them a little bit less for specific reasons.
You know what this reminds me of? You ever watch Arrested Development? She's
No.
she's like, I love all my children equally. And then it cuts to her earlier in the day and she's like, I don't care for him. And it's like, all right, HubSpot and Marketo, we love them. Everyone else will like,
Yeah, I don't
so
like saying it though, I will say,
yeah.
because sometimes but a majority of our clients use those too. So
Where
I can say.
Yeah, so where along this journey, you did like a stint at, I think, Agari, doing demand gen there.
Mhm.
Um, where along this journey did you decide it was time to take on something like founding your own agency, right? CS2 marketing is everywhere. I see it in marketing ops. Like you guys are constantly having conversations around things like the role of marketing ops in today's marketing organizations being beyond just an order taker or a tactician, a reactive
Mhm.
tactician, and really playing a strategic role in an org. Where did you decide along that it was time to start that?
Yeah, that's good question. So to your point too, like how things have evolved, maybe is kind of how I could talk about the evolution of CS2 as well.
Hmm.
And actually, our domain is CS2 marketing. We're thinking of changing it because we dropped the marketing. We're just CS2 now.
Nice.
But but everyone, if they call us that, that's totally fine. But the so I think. So in my background, you noted that I like went into a demand generation role. I had a global role prior to that at a company called Jive, and I, set up all of their operations there, and ran a team and supported a team of global marketers. That's where I met my husband, Charlie. He was working there at the time, and he was in EMEA, and we kind of had like a long distance relationship and marriage. And then during that time, I moved to a new company because I thought it'd be weird to work with my husband, just since we met there and stuff. And I was looking for a change. I think at the time I was pretty strategic in my role, but I was still on this like grappling, like, do I want to go the CMO route, or like, do I want to stay more in operations? And we still struggle with it today around like, if does operations have like a ceiling or anything like that. But I still felt like at the time operations didn't get the respect that like those other departments got.
Yeah.
And um I like was really interested in the marketing side. I knew how to do it anyway. I knew what the best programs were running anyway, because I always provided all the data and analytics and so forth. So I took on more of a demand gen role, but I was doing operations. I was doing demand gen. I was like running the SDR team. I then was like almost like pseudo kind of rev ops because we needed sales operations. So I was doing a lot. And I kind of got like a bit burnt out. But the one thing that I really realized was like, I like just providing value to clients and problem solving. And
Hmm.
I didn't really particularly like some like office politics and things like that. And I wanted to kind of, maybe try something new. I was looking for something with a bit more flexibility. I feel like if anyone's heard me on a podcast, I've talked about it before, but I was just going through something personally at the time with my dad, and he was sick, and I kind of wanted to have more flexibility to like work from home, which now is like what everyone does mostly. But I was always having to commute like an hour and back like each day to some of my jobs. So yeah. And then Charlie was moving out from England, and we thought, okay, this could be a good time. Maybe we start something together. I was going to maybe start it first just because he hadn't moved out yet. We had previously had like a kind of small business together. That was a Kickstarter that didn't, we decided to put on pause. And so we kind of had that itch for like entrepreneurship, really. And so then I've worked with agencies in the past. Like every time I was overloaded, I was then, from my boss being like, well, why don't you just work with an agency? And then we'd bring them on to maybe take on a few projects that I just really needed done. And I just felt like it wasn't really great. I was having to fix all of the work. I feel like they didn't really dive into the real needs of like what our company needed. It was more like, hey, we deliver this to every company. Here you go. And I didn't like that experience. And I'm like, wow, I could do better than this. Like I mean, like I feel like there's a need that is, and they were charging a ton of money for it at the time too. And so I think that was like kind of the crux of like, okay, maybe we should go on our own and do something. But we still had it be more marketing centric. So I reached out to people in my network, and we had like 5 clients from the start. And we took the approach of like marketing ops, but also a bit of demand gen, like doing email marketing and SDR sequences and things like that. And because of that, that's why our name was CS2 Marketing.
Yeah.
But then over time, we realized, okay, where we can really provide like true value is through the operations. And over time, that expanded into more of like like I would say RevOps and what it is today. And that's kind of what we still do. We expand, we do marketing operations, but why we call it revenue growth architectures, we feel like it's a lot more than just what people call typical marketing operations. So yeah, that was the kind of crux for it and how it evolved. And I was really lucky to have some great clients at the start. And some ended up being clients for like 9 years. Some in an evolution of one of our client has been one of our clients for the whole time that we started at CS2. They're our first client, and they're still a client today. And we're celebrating 10 years next year, I think. Yeah. Or this year.
Yes. Flex. Like I'd be telling everyone, I'd be like, our LTV is crazy.
But yeah, so it's really lucky in that way. And they've even been acquired and we still get taken on. But yeah, and we have some clients that I started working with in, early 2016, and they're still valuable clients of ours. So we have more of like an embedded type of service, and there's always things to be done, always things to evolve. And I will say though, as we've expanded and grown, we've taken a more purposeful, instead of like, hey, let's just execute on what you need done, to, hey, you come on board, we're going to show you and put you through like what found a great operational foundation is, and guide you through that. And also our key main focus is to everything we do is around improving the customer journey, creating operational efficiencies, or providing data and insights. We do a lot of stuff in between there, but I would say a majority of all the projects that we do can in some way or somehow be, filtered into those 3 value props.
Yeah. So that brings an excellent point where, I think, how do you come to these companies when you start these relationships? So many agencies are sort of, like you mentioned, we're just going to do what you're asking. We're just going to do, look at things that have already been done, right? How do you bring proactive suggestions about that strong operational base, but also be proactive about opportunities for expansion and opportunities for more in-depth reporting or revenue structures?
Yeah. So one of the we have a blog post on it, like what revenue growth architecture is, but a lot of what we saw was with our clients that we typically ran a lot of the same projects.
Yeah.
In between the big rock projects, we help them operationalize a funnel, which also meant like their handoff and who should, become sales ready, the lead scoring or prioritization that supports that, routing and things like that, their order of operations, how they're running campaigns, and then also their like simple attribution, like lead sourcing and things like that. And then we'll normally work on like operationalizing ABM. And then we have a small campaign operations arm, and we'll usually set up campaign operations process, or we can do some execution on it. And then we focus on like data, and the enrichment side, segmentation, audience segmentation, all of the kind of integrations of your tools and tech stack and sales engagement platforms and so forth. So that's kind of like our main things. And then the analytics side, like you said, and insights. And so that we kind of map that all out. We're like, okay, what are all of this, the main things? Like, okay, we went through like years and years of doing projects, and we like documented that. And then we went through also just all of our inbound messages from clients that we brought on board, or even from our contact sales. It's like, and we saw consistent themes. We need help with our funnel. We need better insights. We are trying to do ABM. We don't, where to start. Like, how do we operationalize that? We need, we need to scale out our programs. And so that fed it into it too. So it supported that. So now we have typically like an assessment that we can run with a client who comes on board, and for our funnel architecture, which is where we would have people start, which kind of goes into a lot of those things I talked about. And that gives us an idea of like what needs to be done, and also has like our point of view, and we compare to like what is the best of standard for that. And then we'll like usually start executing on that. And the benefit too is we've built a lot of things around that. So we have we mainly work with Salesforce customers, but we have a custom object tracking method for lifecycle that we've developed, and we've rolled that out in the last year, and that's been great. So it's almost like a pinnacle of that, where they also benefit from having this like great reporting and the best way to track a funnel. And it's all funnels. It's not just starting from MQL, but outbound funnels, partner funnels. We call it kind of almost all bound, and it's so useful and cohorted, and you don't have to join leading contacts together and anything like that. So, and then we do source attribution tied to it for the tipping point. So it's been an unlock for a lot of clients, because that's like a lot of what they're looking for. And at the same time, it develops a great sales process for them, which is also where we just see companies are really flawed. They think they have a process. They think they have stage definitions nailed down. Yeah. They're like, oh, we do have an MQL or sales ready person. Okay, what does that mean? Or an opportunity. When does that get created? Oh, it's just when the salesperson decides that meeting should be converted.
Yeah.
And so we'll run to clients now usually through that. And if they're a client who needs other things done, we still will do now kind of like a scorecard where we assess like areas of opportunity across revenue growth architecture, so they can see kind of our diagram that we have, and we'll mark off like, okay, you need help here, here, and here. So always thinking about that, and we'll help kind of roadmap with the client on based on their goals from their company, what they should prioritize, and also based on their resources and stuff. But it usually always starts with funnel architecture.
Yeah. So how do you go about when, right now, for example, you mentioned like MQLs, right? And that's like the big thing. The MQL is dead. This is dead. XYZ is dead. How do you go about contextualizing that as more of a reporting structure with standardized qualifiers for each of those stages, as opposed to saying, when you have the philosophical debate that people have on the other end of it saying, oh, these things don't exist or they don't work anymore, right? And when from that side of things, it's more of a functional thing. How do you have those conversations?
Yeah, I think that the way we structure it is kind of like for the client is, hey, a concept of an MQL, we agreed, like probably don't call it an MQL.
Yeah.
That's very like short-sighted. We actually call it what we try and get clients to call it is we call that stage sales ready. And the reason why we do that is because there can be times where someone is sales ready, but marketing didn't qualify it. Like a salesperson has just said, hey, I want to start working this lead. They're a great lead. Okay, that's sales ready in our opinion. So we're going to start a funnel then. And that's an outbound funnel. Or a partner has said, hey, this person's sales ready. Okay, now let's create a funnel for that. And so I think for us, it's like, what is dead is like you should just report on MQLs and just report on volume and just be gold on a volume for MQLs. And you're missing out when you're just using MQLs or what you say is ready for sales from a marketing standpoint. And that's where you lose a big picture of like what's happening and your funnel data can be fragmented. And so we'll kind of educate the client on that. And also we have firm ideas. A lot of people are like, oh, we don't need a person funnel. Like we can just work accounts. It's like, well, how do you know who to work at that account? And also, what do you do with all the people that come through that aren't part of your target accounts or is tied to an account? Like, how are you going to work them? So we've actually worked with like some like big name clients who they didn't even have a person funnel, and they missed out on a bunch of deals. And finally, it took like one deal or someone coming through, and their CEO finding out, and they look to us and bring us on as a client to kind of fix some things like that. So, I think it's taking a commanding approach with our clients of like, hey, this is actually what we think is a good way to track things. Also, not having acronyms around your stages is something we suggest. But we typically find a middle ground. Hey, if your company's always been used to calling it this, okay, maybe we have the status be MQL, but then for a tracking purpose, we'll call that stage like sales ready, or okay, you're really tied to calling that SQL. That's fine. We usually call it meeting booked, but you can call it SQL, but as long as we know that means like meeting booked, then it's fine. So, but we try and be as commanding as possible to say like, hey, this is what you should do. And a lot of clients are receptive to that. If anything, they want that. I think a lot of the time early in consulting, we were almost like too accommodating to clients. And sometimes we would make concessions on like what we think should be done. And it always come back to, oh, well, now we want that, or now we're having this issue. And it's like, yeah, we kind of like said that was going to happen. So I think now having the confidence to be commanding and say like, this is the way you should do it. And our assessment even has a lot of that. A big part of our assessment is just our point of view on things of like why they should do it a certain way. And you'll see that in our content, right? Like that's why we have opinions on a lot of things. That it's been a lot of seeing what works and what doesn't across clients for years and years, and always thinking through, okay, what matches the expectations of the buyers today? What matches the buyer experience today? What matches the company planning today? And that evolves. And that means we change our ways of doing things, but we're always trying to keep things a bit more like forward thinking.
When you go to these orgs and you're kind of saying, commanding, as you put it, which I love. One of the shortcomings for a lot of agencies is they aren't commanding, right? And they are overly accommodating, and they're not really being the expert in the room. They're being the order taker, right? So when you come and you end up working with either a marketing leader or a demand gen person, one, how do you, there's no easy way to tell people that something they're doing is bad, right?
Yeah.
How do you
It's like telling someone their baby's ugly.
Right. How do you tell them they're ugly in a delicate way, but also that reaffirms the value you're bringing to the team?
Yeah. I think we always start out a little bit of like surfacing, and this comes through in our point of view as well, as we always start with like pain points. Like, okay, are you feeling these pains? Is your team spending hours in spreadsheets trying to put like, reporting together and you're still not feeling confident in it? Do you have even like a cohorted view of like your funnel? Is your time to lead, like hours versus minutes? Are you is your team bogged down in errors and chasing things happening in your systems, but not able to actually like do strategic projects? All those things. And a lot of the time they can't fight with like, oh, we have these pain points.
Mhm.
It's very clear. And so then we can then take those pain points and say, well, these are the programs that, or these are the projects that will get rid of that. Big case in point is always like the funnel data, because that's where a lot of, like I said, the funnel architecture and the data around that, what gets prioritized for sales, how they're actually working their leads. It's all very like simple things and foundational, but
Yeah.
there's always a lot of pain points to it because it hasn't really been fully thought through, or there hasn't been invested the time into making it great. So when you lead with some like uncovering some of the pain points, I think that's where you get people like locked in and interested, and you're like, yeah, I want to solve for that. Um, and then also tying it back to the business impact. So we really tried to understand like the goals of the business. It's always like, they're simple goals, revenue. Okay, yeah, of course. Um, but then there's also things like what we talked about, like operational efficiency. Like, is your team just like wasting time? Are you not getting programs out the door fast enough? Are you unable to even understand what's working in your marketing to actually do more of that good marketing? So there's a lot of like efficiencies, lack of insight to data, and then also like what's your customer journey like? And sometimes we'll even just like audit that per client. Like we'll just in our assessment, we'll do test leads. Okay, what happened to us? Like
Right.
we did a contact sales, or what
No one
happens?
reached
And
out to us.
yeah, no one reached out to us. And I think showing that and uncover, like, I think trying to get people aligned on the call will usually surface where there's issues, but we also approach it with a lot of empathy. We're like, hey, a lot of this is hard, or hey, you haven't had the resources to date to do all this stuff. I think one of
Mhm.
the things that I really like, I maybe did it early on when I went in consulting, but I always tell the team not to do this, is like really try not to go into an org and be like, oh my gosh, it's so bad. Like, who did this? Like, what happened here? And do not point fingers or anything like that, because as we know, like people can come in at any point, change things, make things a mess. But also these companies, and we work mainly with startups and scale ups, but they have immense pressure around like getting things done. And a
Mhm.
lot of times they just don't have the resources to do it. And so there's
Fight for their
people that
lives.
are, yeah. And people like you probably in demand gen, and we work with a lot of demand gen people, like they sometimes are the marketing ops person,
Mhm.
and they're trying to balance like, okay, how can I put in some infrastructure while also just, getting programs out the door, like trying to develop a strategy for programs, running webinars, doing all this events and things like that. It's just impossible. So yeah, we try and lead with empathy for the client too, to say like, hey, we know there's probably a lot broken here. And you probably have great people on your team who've been trying to like fix this, but we're just the extra pair of hands to really guide you and give you the map of how you should do it, and also to help you execute, because there's so much to be done. There's so many competing priorities internally. There's a lot of enablement to be done. So
Yeah.
let's just help you get there.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned, the demand marketers who often have to serve as their own marketing ops person, right? Because a lot of
Yeah.
orgs still, I think, don't always value the investment that's needed for a healthy marketing ops and rev ops org. When you work with demand gen folks, right? How often do you run into overlap of responsibilities? And what are your thoughts in terms of, should a demand gen person be able to launch their own email campaigns, launch their own life cycles programs? Like where do you see that line?
Yeah. We see it a lot, especially early stage like startups,
Hmm.
which I think is okay.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't think that you can have that be going on for so long. Or if anything, you need to get an agency to kind of help them, like CS2 or someone else. Um, because it's just too hard. Like, and I'm really all you're going to get done is campaign execution in some ways, or then making sure those leads then get to an SDR or a salesperson. There's not really much that's going to get done beyond that, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they'll be like administering outreach or something, or sales loft and doing sequences, but beyond that, they're not going to have the time to do anything else. So, and if they are, they're working really long hours, like maybe I've done in the past. So anyway, but I think for us, like we'll actually still work with those folks. It is a lot better when they have someone dedicated to operations and RevOps. You can just get more done.
Yeah.
But I do think that a hybrid model is really great. So as far as like running your own programs and emails and things like that, I think it's great for demand gen folks to do that. And then set up structure for them to do that. So like program templates and things like that, and then final QA to be done by a marketing ops team. I also just suggest like campaign operations just be separate from the rest of like RevOps and marketing up, whoever's in charge of RevOps or marketing ops, just not have a big part of their role be campaign execution, because they're also not going to get anything else done. There's just too much to be done there.
It's a lot.
Yeah, and it's just very reactive, and so you can do it maybe at a very, very startup level, but if you want to go anything beyond that, it's not advisable. So even at CS2, our client leads and the rest of our projects and stuff like that is always separate from campaign operations and execution. A team is just focused on doing that because it just operates in just a different fashion. It's very timely. There's a lot of collaboration back and forth, and if you're doing that all the time, you're not going to have time to say like get stakeholders together to workshop your life cycle stages. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, they that I think is an important distinction that a lot of companies don't make, is RevOps, marketing ops side of the house versus campaign ops. Which is, I think it takes away from the ability for folks to really narrow down and focus in on the things that really like they should be focusing on. I think I had a CEO who had a saying, who it was all about, always be helpful to your team, helpful to others, be willing to jump in, but don't forget the job you're paid to do.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think that in some ways it's like you got to be a little bit all hands on deck in a way at like a startup.
Yeah.
And so I think then you can operate in that fashion. But if you have a lot of demand gen marketers, or if you're running a ton of programs, if your budget is like millions of dollars for marketing, like you need to have the equivalent in resources to help get that done. And it's just a different way of like thinking and operating. I do think though that campaign operations is being close to that or having done that as part of your career is just good to do, because then you know what's possible, how things should be set up. Pushing yourself also to maybe run like ABM programs or figure out the infrastructure for that is great, because I think a big thing for me, and where I see the role of the VPs of operations moving more to a VP of RevOps, is you want to flex both sides. You want to first understand like what's great marketing, how do you report on that, how to campaign set up, understanding the attribution side and funnel attribution, things like that. But then also understanding like for the business, what that means as far as like SDR process, how sales work, opportunities, and more efficiencies there. I think you need that like gamut of like the whole thing, literally from like lead in your system and all the way through to like customer and beyond that. And the operational person who can kind of understand the intricacies, and you don't have to know everything. You don't have to be building flows in Salesforce or anything like that, but knowing what's possible and also having some of those technical skills, and then building that with a blend of like business savviness and what needs to be done from the business and what is good marketing and what is the like buyer experience today and how's it evolving. That's going to be what's like a VP of RevOps and then maybe even turn into a CMO one day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Love that. I love that. That's great advice. Great insight there. I think that's a great place for us to wrap things up. Thank you again for taking the time to talk with me
Yeah,
today.
it went so.
Yeah, all right. Any final things you want to share? Any final thoughts or anything you want to plug?
Yeah, so I think for those who are listening and like podcasts, we have a podcast by CS2 called the Revenue Growth Architects Podcast. It used to be called Forward Thinking, but we changed the name last year. You can check that out on our website, cs2marketing.com. And we have a lot of great content there too. Or you can follow myself, just Crissy Saunders. Also my co-founder, Charlie Saunders, and a lot of the team members at CS2 in general post a lot on LinkedIn. But yeah, connect with us there. And we're always taking kind of questions and topics for our podcast that you can email rga@cs2marketing.com for. Yeah, if you want to hear us tackle something. But yeah, I love finally meeting you, Brian, because I know you've been following us for a long time and we'll comment back and forth on LinkedIn. So it's so nice to finally like talk with you, which is exciting. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Collective Wisdom. And thank you, Crissy, for being our guest today. Really look forward to seeing the great work you and Charlie continue to do with CS2. For those listening, if you're a demand marketer looking for a tight-knit community of demand gen experts, be sure to apply to our community Demand Collective at demandcollective.io. Thanks.